Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of Worlds Collide. My name is Mitch. Joined with me today is not Justin, but
Kenny. I'm usually the one running the scenes,
he's our guy in the chair.
so usually it's a lot better when I'm back there and I can focus on unmuting the mic, unlike right now.
So we were just getting started, introducing what the show is going to be about. Today's episode is going to be on,
Spider-Man.
and we're just talking about when did we get into Spider-Man? What was it that got us into Spider-Man? So Kenny,
The thing that got me into Spider-Man was watching the 1960s reruns at like 12 o'clock in the morning when I shouldn't have been up.
and I remember those as a kid as well. I'm pretty sure my fandom of the villain Scorpion came from those those 1960s animated cartoons, because I thought Venom was a really cool looking villain. Scorpion was a really cool looking villain. For me, it was the Maximum Carnage series. When I was a kid, I was just getting into comics. I collected a few Flash comics. I collected a few Batman comics. My best friend Ricky got the issue #1 of Morbius, the Living Vampire, and I kind of got jealous, so I wanted to get that one for myself as well. So I bought Morbius, the Living Legend, issue #1, and it was Spider-Man in there. A very small part in that. But then after that, I saw the Maximum Carnage is starting to come out in print. So I saw this really badass looking, evil looking Spider-Man named Venom, and another monster that looked just like Venom but red, Carnage, and this whole entire big story arc was unfolding with all the different characters of Marvel, like Captain America and all that was showing up in this. So that's what got me into Spider-Man.
Yeah. After watching the 60s cartoon, I remember watching the Sam Raimi early 2000s
yeah.
Spider-Mans. Those were, when you're younger, they're good.
Yeah.
As you get older, you're like, okay.
Yeah. They are good. They get a lot right.
Mm-hmm.
My only issue with those, and this is controversial because a lot of people disagree with me on this, but I'm just not a fan of Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker.
Yeah, I say that.
But we'll get to that. First, I want to explain who is Spider-Man in the comic book world, and what I love about him, what I don't love about him, and well, there's hardly anything I don't love about Spider-Man.
Yeah.
But why I felt like Tobey Maguire was a passable Spider-Man, but he just wasn't there for me. But yeah, so how much, what do you know of Spider-Man's origin before I get started?
Oh, so there was Uncle Ben.
Mm-hmm.
There was the spider that bit him. Uncle Ben died. And then there's the whole, with great power comes responsibility. Uncle Ben's like the one person that never comes back alive.
Yeah, yeah. Sort of.
In most terms.
Yes. Recently, they actually brought him back, but we'll get to that. But yeah, everybody knows Spider-Man's origin. Spider-Man's origin is as well known as Batman's and Superman's.
Mm-hmm.
So Spider-Man started off in 1962. His first issue was Amazing Fantasies number 15. And that's where they told the whole entire origin of Spider-Man. Then he had his first solo issue in 1963, Amazing Spider-Man issue #1. In there, he was trying to join the Fantastic Four. And he infiltrated their base, and they end up tangling. Obviously, he doesn't join the Fantastic Four, but that started a long time friendship between Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, Spider-Man and Human Torch in particular. Mm-hmm. And funny enough, so in the 60s, I think going into the 70s, maybe even a little bit in the 80s, it's appropriate that Fantastic Four, that Spider-Man kind of got his introduction by the Fantastic Four, because Fantastic Four was Marvel's #1 seller, so they used Fantastic Four to introduce multiple new characters. And when Spider-Man took off, Spider-Man was hugely successful as well. So Spider-Man was the gateway to other characters as well. So usually a new character will be introduced through a Spider-Man comic or a Fantastic Four comic, much like
Punisher. Man.
Exactly. Punisher was first appearance was in a Spider-Man. Hulk, his first appearance was in a Wolverine comic. Sorry, vice versa. Wolverine's first appearance was in the Hulk comic.
A short little mad Canadian.
Yeah. So they use issues like that, popular characters, to usher in new characters, and Fantastic Four and Spider-Man were the most well known to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic nowadays because Spider-Man has popular film franchises, while Fantastic Four, it just hasn't made it. Maybe in Marvel Phase
4,
5,
maybe
5.
Yeah, but high hopes because now that Disney actually has the rights and they are going to make a Fantastic Four movie. It's going to be under Kevin Feige's supervision, and it's going to be good, finally.
Yes, it won't be the past 3 movies.
Fat Forstick, God. But yeah. So, what makes Spider-Man great? Spider-Man, to me, is a character that is always faced with adversity. Life shits on him. What makes him relatable to everybody, why he was so popular in the 60s, was the fact that, well, first of all, he was a teenager. He started off in high school. I think he was 16 years old when he first started off. So teenagers could relate to his problems. He had problems with dealing with puberty. He had problems dealing with getting a job, getting a girlfriend to the prom.
The usual high school drama.
Yeah, exactly. Especially in the 1960s, right? When you putting yourself in the 1960s, what was popular back then, like with the sitcoms and whatnot, right? Like Happy Days and stuff like that, right? So Spider-Man had like a bully, and the bully was a jock, and Peter Parker wasn't popular. He wasn't athletic. He was a bookworm, teased and didn't understand girls. Well, girls didn't want to talk to him. So a lot of teenagers reading these comics could really relate to who Peter Parker is. And I think that's what's made it continue to keep him as a popular character, is because he's always been that relatable character. He's always been a very human character. Especially when you compare him to like characters like Superman, even Batman. Batman is human. People will argue, well, Batman has no powers. Spider-Man has powers. Batman has no powers. But the way Batman is written, he's almost godlike as well.
Yeah.
He has like all the money in the world, and he has all the privileges in the world and resources.
He's always written as the playboy
who always has an answer for everything. But I've always made the comparison Spider-Man to Batman as well, because one thing that always appealed to me about Spider-Man is no matter how strong he is, how fast he is, or anything like that, he's always facing against villains that are more powerful than he is. So he's always resorted to using his intelligence to beat his villains. And Batman, in a similar way, does that as well.
And they both share a code of no kill. They try and keep everyone alive. And like Spider-Man, a lot of the time too, he wants everyone to serve justice. And Batman, a lot of the time, especially since a lot of his villains are more mentally unstable people, he wants them to get help to get better.
That's right. Speaking of which, both Batman and Spider-Man, I would argue, probably have on par the best villains gallery. So Batman has his iconic villains, which is Joker, Killer Croc, Penguin, Riddler, Two-Face, Clayface, Mr. Freeze. These are all iconic villains. Scarecrow. These are all iconic characters. But Spider-Man, all his villains are really iconic as well. I mean, you have Dr. Octopus, you have Electro, you have Sandman, you have Rhino, you have Hydro Man, you have the Vulture, Shocker, Scorpion, Venom, Carnage, Green Goblin, all versions of Green Goblin, Hobgoblin. All of these characters are iconic characters.
And even Uncle Ben is iconic.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like everyone knows him.
And everybody knows the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility. Every kid, I know I did, aspired by those words. And the way that they've always written Spider-Man has always been to exemplify that. So to give you some examples, the reason why Maximum Carnage really got me into Spider-Man, if it was just violent nonsense, I probably would not have gotten hooked to Spider-Man as much as I did. Well, when I was reading Maximum Carnage, in there, Carnage's partner Shriek, she has the ability to shoot sonic blasts, but she also emits a sonic AOE that causes schizophrenia, and it was causing all of New York to go crazy, killing each other, turning on each other. Riots were going, and what stopped all this was, well, in large part, Dagger had a lot to do with that because she has the ability to purify people's toxins and purify them in their hearts. But Spider-Man, his morals, standing firm against this onslaught of evil and insanity, with his moral code and never to back down, never to give up attitude, is what brought New York back to the brink of destruction. Even Cletus Cassidy, Carnage, this mass murderer, he has no regard for human life, just kills for the sake of killing. He has no purpose, no goal other than to see blood, see people die. Life is a joke to him. And Spider-Man refuses to kill him. He believes that in some way or another, he can be saved. I brought with me a bunch of comics. This right here, Spider-Man issue number 1. This one was drawn by Todd McFarlane. This is one of Todd McFarlane's first work. So this issue was actually done before Todd McFarlane created Spawn. And then a exact replica of that cover art 12 issues later. So this is Spider-Man number 1. This is Spider-Man number 13. The exact same cover art, but now with the black suit. Now, in this, he's not wearing the symbiote suit, because by this time, this came out in 91, the whole entire Venom story happened in the mid-80s. So the reason why he's wearing this black costume in this is because in this story arc, Michael Morbius is with the Morlocks in the sewers, and Spider-Man's trying to get into the sewers to stop Morbius from killing people, and he puts on the suit so he could not be visible in the sewers.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so it's just
down
this,
there. So
yeah, so this is just fabric. In this one here, it's the Lizard. The Lizard is being controlled by Calypso. Calypso is Kraven's wife, and nothing much happens there except you see the Lizard kill a few people. I have here Spider-Man 2099 issue number 1. So this one here, I brought it with me because I really enjoyed this series. The only 2099 that I really enjoyed, I read X-Men 2099, and I read some Hulk 2099, and I read that's pretty much it. I read Punisher 2099. But Spider-Man 2099 was excellent, and I'm actually quite glad they brought him into the normal continuity, into the present time continuity.
And he's also made a recent appearance in pop culture. He was in a end credit scene for Into the Spider-Verse movie. Yeah. So if you haven't seen it, go seek it out. Yeah. Maybe we'll do an episode on Miles and them. Yeah. Right now we're focusing on Peter. Yeah.
Same with Miguel O'Hare. We will do an episode on Spider-Man 2099 as well. I brought this just because I wish I had brought this with me when we did our episode on Venom. This is Venom's first solo series. Limited series, Venom Lethal Protector. I thought, man, I wish I would have remembered to bring this comic with me. I thought I had lost this. When I found this, I'm like, okay, I need to bring this and show to people. So, Venom issue number 1, Venom Lethal Protector issue number 1.
Featuring Spider-Man.
Yeah, featuring Spider-Man, of course. Now, this one is one of my prize. This is the I believe the only time Spider-Man has ever worn the spider armor. I think that one's just called the spider armor. So in this, he's facing against the new enforcers. So the enforcers back in the 1960s, they were just 4 members. It was Ox, it was Montana, it was it was just 3 members actually. So Ox was just a really strong guy. Montana was really good with a lasso, and Fancy Dan was the 3rd member, and he was just really good with his feet. He was really quick, really good on his feet. Kind of like a fighter, but he was like a midget kind of thing. They were like circus freaks almost. They were also employed by the Kingpin. But this Enforcers, they were much larger. It was like 12 members in there. They were all super powered. The original Enforcers, they weren't super powered. They were just
thugs.
Yeah, but like superior skilled thugs, but thugs nonetheless.
So almost in a way like Punisher?
Yeah.
Because he doesn't have any powers, but he's good at what he does.
Yeah. Punisher would wreck them, but yeah.
Yeah. So like a tier below them.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, so this new Enforcers, they were numerous, like a dozen of them. I don't know how many there were, but it was a bunch of them. So Spider-Man had to go there and defeat them, but he knew that he was outnumbered like mad, and all of them have powers. So he figured out a way to solidify his webbing and turn that into an armor. So this right here is actually solidified armor. It's not actually steel.
Oh, okay.
But a lot of people have seen this armor in various video games. Usually you play a video game where you can unlock different costumes for Spider-Man. The spider armor is one of those. I think this is the only issue he's ever worn it.
I mean, spider silk is usually stronger than
regular
stronger
silk.
than steel.
Yeah.
So, and then it makes sense to make a costume out of it.
Yeah. It got destroyed like in the same issue he was wearing. Like he takes a gunshot, a little bit chips off, and takes another gunshot, a little bit chips off, kind of thing. It did slow him down as well, so he wasn't a real fan of it anyways. But it did save his butt in that.
It'd probably be, since he's made it before, he'd probably be able to make it again if he needed it. But.
Why? Not that once he's tasted Iron Man's the Iron Spider. Iron Spider is like way better than that old piece of junk was. Even now, like all the different gadgets that Spider-Man has access to now, it blows this thing out of the water. And the new training that he's had, we'll get to that in a bit. So this right here is also the story arc that got me into Spider-Man. So this happened shortly after Maximum Carnage. So let me explain something to you. Actually, this is part of it too. This is part of it as well. So during Maximum Carnage, this has started way before Maximum Carnage. But so when I first started reading Maximum Carnage, Peter Parker's parents were back. So for people who don't know, Peter Parker's parents died in a plane crash when he was like 4, and Aunt May and Uncle Ben took him in and raised him as their own. So from the age of 4 to the age of like Maximum Carnage, he would have been in his early 20s. His parents were dead, and then one day his parents came back into his life. Turns out the story was that Richard and Mary Parker were actually secret agents infiltrating the Red Skull's team or organization, trying to infiltrate Red Skull so it gets information on Red Skull. And that was legit, and that's why they died in that plane crash. But when they came back, you find out that they were actually captured and they were put into an internment camp. But there was a period where they were being framed and saying that they were actually double agents. They were actually working for the Red Skull, and they ended up dying for it. But that's not the case. They were in internment camp. They finally got away from the Red Skull, and then came back to New York, and they were back in Peter Parker's life. Aunt May thought they were imposters. She didn't trust them at first. Peter Parker didn't trust them at first because he thought he could be a supervillain trying to mess with him. They found out who he really is, and they're trying to mess with him. So he didn't trust them at first. The only one who actually trusted him somewhat was Mary Jane. So this happened before I started reading Maximum Carnage. So in Maximum Carnage, his parents are already in the picture. They were with Aunt May when they had to run away from like the chaos and the violence and everything like that. Mm-hmm. And so after that, Aunt May finally starts to trust them, starts to believe that they are actually her brother and sister-in-law, and her brother-in-law and sister-in-law, because Richard Parker was the brother of Ben Parker. All right, sorry about that, everybody. So where were we? Oh yeah, Peter Parker's parents. Anyways, so they're in a picture. Aunt May didn't trust him at first, but she starts to trust him. Peter Parker is finally starting to want them. He starts to believe that they are his parents. And then he decides that it's time that he's going to reveal his secret identity to his parents. When he reveals his identity to his parents, something happens inside them, though. Programming starts, and then they go report back to their master. So it turns out they weren't him. Lay down. Taylor's down.
Kirby said.
Sorry about that. Where's the Kirby emote? Or no, it was a Bowser emote that we have. Right?
Yeah, well, coming soon.
Yeah. So, anyways, turns out his parents were actually robots that were sent by the Vulture, and the purpose of these robots were to tag along Peter Parker, like be his parent. So, anyways. They go report back to the Vulture. The reason why the Vulture was sending Peter Parker's parents alive, why he made these robots, was to find out who Spider-Man's true identity was. Because Vulture didn't know who Spider-Man was, but he knew that Peter Parker took pictures of Spider-Man. So these robots were instructed to be Peter Parker's parents until Spider-Man's secret identity has been revealed. They report back to the Vulture. So Spider-Man ends up following these robots back and finds out that if the Vulture was behind him, Vulture ends up fighting. Vulture at this time was still an old man. He ends up creating these gauntlets that could absorb life energy, as you can see here on this issue here. He's actually absorbing the life energy of Spider-Man. He was actually absorbing life energy of the android robots, Peter Parker's parents. Can you be quiet, stupid?
There's a party going on.
Yeah?
Yeah, so I have to put Bowser in front.
Alright.
Hopefully they'll be down.
Alright, so as I was saying, so his parents were robots. Vulture had sent them to find out who Spider-Man's true identity was, why he used Peter Parker, because Peter Parker takes pictures of Spider-Man. So they were instructed to be his parents until they found out who Spider-Man was. Turns out Peter Parker was Spider-Man. So Spider-Man finds these robots, follows these robots back to Vulture's lair. Vulture creates these gauntlets to absorb life energy, and first he starts absorbing life energy of, he tries to steal the life energy of Spider-Man, but these android parents of Peter Parker stops the Vulture because they genuinely did have feelings for Peter Parker. They genuinely, for a period, believed they were his parents. So that programming kicked in, and they stopped the Vulture from killing Spider-Man, and in that process, killing the two androids. So the reason why I enjoy this so much was, well, it's kind of sadist to me. The reason why I enjoy this so much is because this shows what I mean by the life shits on Peter Parker. So it's not bad enough that he feels the guilt of the death of his Uncle Ben. It's not bad enough that he feels the guilt of the death of Gwen Stacy, which we'll come back to in a moment, because that was a pivotal moment as well. It's not bad enough that Captain James the Wolf died because of him. Or Captain Stacy died because of Spider-Man. Now he had to experience the death of his parents all over again. Even though they died when he was 4 years old, now he has to experience that death all over again. So he got attached to these people as his parents, and now they're dead.
And I mean, the last act they did too was to save him.
Exactly.
So that makes it even worse.
Exactly. So once again, these stories is what made me fall in love with Spider-Man. Because these are deep, these are heart-wrenching, these are painful, and yet he still keeps going. Although he did lose his shit, though. Like in this, so he finds out that Vulture didn't do this on his own. It was actually a chameleon that put the Vulture to it. So in this issue here, Pursuit, this is where Spider-Man is going after the chameleon. And the chameleon is hiding in one of Kraven's old hideouts. And Spider-Man ends up chasing the chameleon to this hideout. Chameleon sends these two tigers after Spider-Man. And Spider-Man, I'm pretty sure, breaks their neck. Yeah. And then as he's going after the chameleon, he was ready to kill the chameleon. Like he had chameleon dead. But he didn't do it. That voice in Uncle Ben came in and reminded him who he was. With great power comes great responsibility. He doesn't kill. He doesn't do what Chameleon does. Much later on, like I said, a year or two later, Peter Parker finds out that it was actually Harry Osborn that was behind the chameleon, that was behind the Vulture sending those androids. Harry Osborn, when he was still under the influence of the Goblin juice, when he was the Green Goblin, he set this in motion before he died. So it was actually Harry Osborn that was behind this entire time. So that messed with him quite a bit as well. I had that issue as well, the issue where Harry Osborn dies. He ends up dying because the chemical inside him was actually killing him. I'm pretty sure it was like a heart attack. The entire issue, you see him sweating, and he tried to kill Mary Jane. And he wasn't a good person. Harry Osborn was a Green Goblin. He was hell-bent on destroying Spider-Man and everything in his life. That's why it's hard to distinguish the difference between Venom and Green Goblin, because they both have had that advantage where they know who Spider-Man is, and they both have used his loved ones to get at him. But yeah, I talked about Gwen Stacy. I should probably go back and talk about Gwen Stacy. Mm-hmm. Gwen Stacy was his first true love. He's dated, his first girlfriend was Betty Brant, or was it Liz Allen? So no, he had a crush on Liz Allen. He dated Betty Brant. That didn't last very long. And then when he went to college, he met Gwen Stacy, and they dated, and they fell in love. And then in a fight between him and Norman Osborn, Green Goblin, Norman Osborn drops Gwen Stacy at the broken bridge. Spider-Man tries to save her, much like in Amazing Spider-Man, the movie, where Green Goblin, where Harry drops Gwen Stacy down the bell tower, and Spider-Man tries to save her by webbing her, and it just wasn't enough. It wasn't in time. She still snapped and smashed her head on the ground. In this, Spider-Man jumps down and webs Gwen Stacy, but the snap of the abrupt stop from her falling from the top of the broken bridge snapped her neck. Mm-hmm. So he felt the guilt of killing the love of his life. You later on find out she was already dead, but it still pains him. Like, he still feels like he's the one who had her killed. Then the ensuing fight was just like in the Sam Raimi movie, where he's fighting Norman Osborn, and then Norman Osborn tries to kill Spider-Man with a Goblin glider, and Spider-Man gets out of the way and impales himself. So that was that story arc. That was an important story because that was the first time in comics where the hero didn't win. He didn't save the girl. The girl died. And that changed the way things were written back then, because that was like in the 1970s, and stuff like that didn't happen back then. But yeah.
One thing I've heard about that, it was that the main writer on the story wanted Peter to be with Mary Jane at the end, and so he wanted to get rid of Gwen Stacy as possibility permanently. So, you can talk about like character OC. So he really wanted Peter with Mary Jane.
Yeah. All right, that makes sense. And I don't know. I didn't read much Gwen Stacy, so I don't know why this writer preferred Mary Jane over Gwen Stacy. But I came to love Mary Jane. Mary Jane was a fantastic character, so I guess that makes sense. And I mentioned like the death of Captain Stacy, Gwen's dad. I didn't read those issues, but I know that he died, and despite Spider-Man trying to save him, and that was a death that's affected Spider-Man.
You should stop trying to save the Stacys.
Yes. Well, he's out of Stacys now.
True.
Sort of. I've got these trades back home. I couldn't find them, but this is a story I was going to talk about when we talk about Norman Osborn. I'll talk about Green Goblin. Is I wanted to go over all the Green Goblin's greatest hits against Spider-Man, and Gwen Stacy counts for numerous of those hits, because you find out, we'll go over this in the Green Goblin episode more thoroughly, but in this you find out that there was a period where, but just before Gwen Stacy died, Gwen Stacy ended up going away on vacation in Europe, and then when she came back, that's when she died. But you find out in an issue that I had, in the trade that I had, that was written in like the 2000s. So Gwen died in the 70s. In the 2000s, there was a series that came out, and you find out that while she was in Europe, Norman Osborn was also in Europe, and pretty much coaxed her and tricked her into sleeping with him. She got pregnant, had twins. And then Norman Osborn forced her to give those kids up, kind of thing.
That's a
twist, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of messed up, right? Because like Gwen is the same age as like Harry, his son. He's the same age as like Peter, but he did it just to get to Peter. So. Years later, these children of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn comes back to New York to kill Spider-Man, because Norman Osborn corrupted them into thinking Spider-Man was evil, and the cause of Gwen Stacy's death. And they're not the only ones who's blamed Spider-Man for Gwen Stacy's death. You have the Jackal as well, which might be a good segue to the next story I wanted to talk about. So the Jackal was Miles Warren, who was a professor for Spider-Man and Peter Parker and Gwen Stacy. We talked about him in the Punisher episode, because all of this happened here when Punisher got introduced. But yeah, so when Gwen died, Jackal blamed Spider-Man / Peter Parker. Somehow Miles Warren knew that Spider-Man was Peter Parker. Blamed Spider-Man / Peter Parker, became a supervillain hell-bent on making them pay. In comes the clones. So, yeah, back in the 70s, this happened back in the 70s, the Jackal, Miles Warren, created a clone, and the goal of this clone was to A, mess with Spider-Man's head, and B, to replace Spider-Man, and also to kill Spider-Man. So a fight ensues. So Spider-Man finds his clone. A fight ensues. Building collapses. Everybody thinks that this cloned Peter Parker is dead. Come the 90s, this clone resurfaces. This clone didn't die. This clone went off to a different city and started his own life. Called himself Ben Reilly. So Ben after Uncle Ben, and Riley being the maiden name of Aunt May. Her name was May Riley. So Ben Riley was the pseudonym that he created for himself. Dyed his hair blonde, which is why I really liked how in Into the Spider-Verse, the Spider-Man from the Ultimate from Miles Universe had the blonde hair. I thought it was a really nice nod to the Ben Riley when he had the blonde hair. But yeah, so Ben Riley went off to do his own thing, but he was chased, and he had his own supervillain, his own arch nemesis, his own Green Goblin, by the name of Kane, and he followed Kane all the way back to New York. So that's why he came back to New York, and then so this started the infamous Clone Saga. If you talk to any comic book fan that's read comics in the 90s, they'll more than likely shudder at the word clones. It had a really bad rep, and rightfully so. I read through the Clone Saga, and it was good. I really enjoyed it, but it got so convoluted, so complicated, so widespread that it just lost focus. The story just went nowhere after a while. They were just messing up on all cylinders. Started off real strong, but it kind of lost the point of the entire thing. But yeah, so, and the reason why I'm mentioning that, and to segue for this comic, it's going to be hard to see from the camera, I think, but this is Spider-Man issue number 400. All right, cool art, right? I don't know if you guys can see that from the camera, but this is Spider-Man issue number 400. All right, it's a white cover, and you can see in a silhouette just Spider-Man. And you see a death in the family is the title of this comic. If you open it up, and also you can open it up, and it's the actual cover art, the actual comic, but it's a tombstone. So I thought that was neat. So in this is the death of Aunt May. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, so in this entire Ben Riley, the Peter Parker's clone coming back, and Peter Parker and Ben Riley kind of come to an agreement that Ben Riley stays out of Peter Parker's life because Peter Parker has his own life. He's got his life going, and Ben Riley showing his face, looking exactly like Spider-Man, but with, like Peter Parker, but with blonde hair. Is going to cause some questions. It's going to, what's they going to do to poor old frail Aunt May, and all that, right? So, and Ben agreed to this, but he didn't want to, because to him, these memories he has are the same as Peter Parker's. Like, up until his creation, all the memories he has from the 1970s back are real to him. So his love for Aunt May is real. His love for Mary Jane is real. His love for Gwen Stacy is real. For him, these memories are real. So there was a story just before this where Peter Parker was dying, and Aunt May tells him, is comforting him, and she tells him the Peter Parker story, the Peter Pan story. Just go to the second star to the right and keep on going, kind of thing, right? So he ends up surviving that. But then in this issue, Aunt May ends up dying, and you see Peter Parker. Let me go to that page. So Peter Parker is you see Peter. Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah. So you see Peter. He's consoling Aunt May here. And he knows that she's dying. She knows that she's dying. She tells him that she's on her way out. And in this, he ends up saying those exact same lines to her. Says, let go, fly, second to the right, and straight on till morning. This is the first time I read a comic that actually made me cry. Like, I was reading this, I had a small tear to me. I mean, like, this, look how sad this picture is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, you turn the page here, and you see Ben Reilly on the rooftop. And that struck a chord for me because, like I said, his memories of Aunt May are real. But he can't go down there and comfort her. Like, to him, that's his Aunt May that's dying. But he can't touch her. He can't go talk to her. He can't comfort her. He has to stay away. He has to stay separate. He has to mourn by himself. He can't let anybody know that he's mourning. He has nobody to lean on. So that's why that image hit me so hard. That was so gut-wrenching for me.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out afterward, this wasn't actually Aunt May. Aunt May was actually kidnapped by who else? Green Goblin. And this was actually a stand-in or an actor or a clone. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't really her, which I don't like. I think this death would have been a fine death for Aunt May. Issue number 400. Look at the artwork they give on this comic. And then they cheesed it out by saying that she wasn't actually dead, that Norman Osborn had her kidnapped, and it was just a clone. I wasn't a fan of it. I think Aunt May should have stayed dead. But, that being said, let's talk about Aunt May a little bit. Some people have asked me, what do I think of hot young Aunt May? I'm a fan of it. It makes sense to me. Because she's his aunt. She's not his great aunt. She's not his grandmother. She's not his great grandmother. Mm-hmm. She's always been depicted as this frail old lady. She's been perpetually 80 years old since his inception. Like, he was 16 years old. She looks like she was on her deathbed. And she's been on her deathbed for the last 40, 50 years. Well, in comic standards, time moves much, much slower. Like, he's got his start in 1962, and by 1992, he's still 21 years old.
Yeah.
But she's been frail and almost dying ever since then. And it never made any sense. Why is she that much older? She should be in her 30s or 40s. Well, he's 16, so in her 40s anyways. Not 70, 80 years old. So that's why I like this Aunt May. It makes much more sense to me.
Aunt May was always the weird, like Aunt May and Uncle Ben. Always weird that they were so depicted. They were depicted as being so much older, even though they were supposed to be like just a couple of years older than his parents.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't really make much sense.
I think it was a product of its time.
The era.
Yeah, because they were trying to give frail characters that Peter Parker, that Spider-Man could save on a consistent basis. Mm-hmm. But nowadays, readers don't want to see that. They want to see stronger characters, stronger, independent characters. Mm-hmm. His first villain was another reason why I liked Homecoming. His first villain in the comics was indeed actually Vulture. Technically, Chameleon, because Chameleon made an appearance in Amazing Fantasy number 15. In Amazing Spider-Man number 1, when he goes and meets the Fantastic Four. The Chameleon was in that issue, but he only reveals himself at the very end of the comic. Spider-Man never actually fights him. He doesn't really come into conflict with Spider-Man, so in all technicality, the Vulture was his first supervillain. Mm-hmm. The first supervillain to have defeated Spider-Man was Dr. Octopus, which is why he was cemented as one of his arch nemesis. And then we have Norman Osborn and Harry Osborn.
And goblins.
Yes. Yeah, so all these comics I brought with me because they all have an important part to me. Like, these are all building blocks to why I became such a big fan of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed Spider-Man, especially with the TV depictions. They always gave him like a good wit.
Yeah.
And like of the Spider-Man comics I've read, he always still has the wit. And,
Yeah.
And so it's fun to just read that and have it be like lighthearted and fun, even though like, oh, Aunt May's off dying.
Yeah. And that was the other appeal about Spider-Man, is that he's lighthearted. The stories were light. They were funny. He would joke. He would insult the bad guys. Oftentimes, he would use that as a weapon. He would actually taunt them to the point where they would make mistakes. And so this is a long runabout back to why I don't like Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker as much. So first movie, he did fine. He played the geeky, nerdy loser very well. But the thing is that he doesn't look like a high schooler. He looks like he should have been in college. And by the time Peter Parker was in college, he had a backbone. He wasn't the bookworm nerd loser. He had a beautiful girlfriend, Gwen Stacy. He had a best friend, Harry Osborn. They were friends with Mary Jane, who was an actress and a model. So he wasn't the loser that he was back in high school. And one could argue that's fine. It just means that he became Spider-Man much later in life, and becoming Spider-Man is what made him have a spine to become less of a loser. That's true, which is why I didn't mind the first one. Tobey Maguire's passing in the first one, but you're still a sap in the second one. You're more of a sap in the third one. He never grew.
Dance in the third.
God.
Just delete it from history.
Yeah, but I mean, so my issue with Tobey Maguire is that he never grew. He remained the same as he was in the first movie. He was still a pathetic sap. And that wasn't Peter Parker.
And then we had
Andrew Garfield.
I actually kind of liked him as Peter Parker.
I did as well. I liked him quite a bit as Peter Parker. I believed him more as being very smart. I believed him... he was funnier. He made me giggle. Once again, though, not a high schooler.
No. Definitely not.
No. A big complaint about him is that he was a little bit too much of a backbone. He completely was not a loser, like skateboarding around. And in that movie, he's not the one that's being bullied. It's somebody else that's being bullied. And he stands up for the one that's being bullied. So I understand that complaint, but I still liked him more than Tobey Maguire.
Now we have Tom Holland.
He's my favorite. Yeah, by far, there's no question about it. He's my favorite. He looks the part. He looks like he could be in high school. He's funny. He's witty. He's charming. Once again, I believe him being super smart. Yeah, he's at emotional moments, like that one scene in a movie where he's pinned against the rubble and he's asking for help, and when he realizes nobody there to help him, he has to find the strength in himself to push that rubble off of him, the tons and tons of building that's on top of him. It's actually from an issue in the early Amazing Spider-Man, where I think it was Dr. Octopus drops a building on Spider-Man, and he's about ready to give up. He can't lift that building, so he's about ready to give up. All right, I'm ready. I had a good run. I've saved a bunch of people's lives. Now it's my time. But then he started thinking, wait, what about Gwen? What about Aunt May? What about Harry? What about all the loved ones that I'm leaving behind? And he started thinking about all that, and that gives him the adrenaline and the will and the drive to push that rubble off of him to save himself. So that was a really iconic scene. So I really like that from Homecoming. Having the Vulture as it was Liz, right? Liz Allen. Or they never actually said her last name in the movie, right? They just called her Liz, right?
Yeah. Might have mentioned Yeah, I don't really remember them mentioning a last name.
No, I don't think so either. Kind of thing, because I was assuming she was Liz Allen, But then they introduced her as Vulture's daughter, and Vulture, his name is escaping me right now. It is. Anyways, it's not Alan. But yeah, so that movie was fun. I like the alternative take to Mary Jane or MJ in this. Instead of being a supermodel / soap opera actor, she just another high school kid who's very, very quirky. I like her quite a bit.
And Zendaya does a pretty good job
Yeah.
playing her.
Yeah, she's a really good actor. I like her quite a bit. And then you've seen Far From Home?
Yeah.
I freaking love Far From Home. So 2 for 2 so far. So a big complaint all the Marvel movies have had, most of the Marvel movies have had, is that they've had weak villains. Which, yeah, like the first 2 Iron Man, the first 3 Iron Mans, all the Iron Mans for that matter, have had weak villains. Thor 1 and 2 had weak villains. Even I'd argue, well, no, Hela was a good villain.
Hela was a good villain, but she was underutilized.
She was underutilized. And not her actual story arc. She's actually a combination of like 2 different characters. But yeah, so Thor, not really the most amazing standout villains. Who am I thinking? Captain America. Like, well, Red Skull. Hugo Weaving as Red Skull, he killed it. And Captain America had pretty good villains throughout. Because the second Captain America was Winter Soldier, and that's when things really started to pick up for Marvel. What else came out during that time? I guess The Incredible Hulk with the Abomination. Yeah.
The Abominable Hulk.
Yeah. Even like Guardians. Ronan the Accuser was not that amazing of a villain. It was not that memorable of a villain. Even Guardians 2, Star-Lord's dad, Aeon or Apoc? Aeon? Ego. Yeah, Ego. Yeah. Ego. He forgettable villain, really. He's not that amazing of a villain.
And then with Loki and Avengers.
Yeah, so Loki was that was a home run. Thanos was a home run. You have Killmonger. Killmonger was a home run.
Black Panther was a home run.
Yeah, Black Panther was a great movie. Yeah. Winter Soldier was a home run, even though he's not really a villain. He was the antagonist of that movie. So, nailed it out of the park with him. And Spider-Man's been 2 for 2. Michael Keaton as the Vulture. When I first heard, like before this movie even came out, I heard they cast Michael Keaton as the Vulture. I'm like, oh, that's so good. That is so insanely good. And sure enough, yeah, he knocked it out of the park. He was excellent as a Vulture. And then Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. Anybody could play Mysterio, just get a good actor. And, well, they got Jake Gyllenhaal, a damn good actor.
Oh, yeah.
And he nailed it out of the park as well. So far, the Spider-Mans are 2 for 2. Excellent villains. Excellent stories. The supporting cast are great. It's lighthearted, but not a comedy. Like, I feel like Guardians... well, the first Guardians was good. My complaint with Guardians 2 is it felt more like a comedy. So the first Guardians, in my opinion, was a good summer blockbuster action with good comedy to it. Guardians 2 felt like a comedy with some good blockbuster action added to it. Some will argue Thor Ragnarok is on that same vein, but I enjoyed Thor Ragnarok quite a bit, actually. It's very well written, very well directed, and visually stunning.
I have my complaints with it, but it was good overall.
Yeah. Well, like you said, Hela was underutilized.
Yeah. I also felt like there was like the whole storyline with Hela, which like blocked it. So it was like the opening and the end, and then there's a story on the trash planet, and they felt kind of separate.
They definitely did.
So they could have used more connection between, or even they could have been two different movies.
They definitely could have been two different movies, and in all intents and purposes, they are two different movies because they're telling two different stories. They're telling they're telling the Ragnarok story, as well as World War Hulk story combined into one. But yeah. Back to Spider-Man. So, let's talk about Amazing Spider-Man 2. So, everybody disses Spider-Man 3. But there's a lot of good things about Spider-Man 3, and there's also some good things about Amazing Spider-Man 2. But I have to say Amazing Spider-Man 2 is worse than Spider-Man 3. As bad as emo Spider-Man, emo Peter Parker was, and that was terrible. I liked Topher Grace as Eddie Brock because I read the Ultimate Spider-Man. So in regular Spider-Man, Eddie Brock is the roided out jock bodybuilder, but in the Ultimate Spider-Man, he wasn't a bodybuilder. He was pretty much the same size as Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. So Topher Grace was good casting in that, in my opinion. And I like Topher Grace. I always felt like Topher Grace would have been a better Peter Parker than Tobey Maguire. And in that movie, in my eyes, he proved that. He was funny, he was witty, he was quick with the tongue. He was more Peter Parker than Peter Parker was Peter Parker. Mm-hmm. James Franco as Harry Osborn was excellent as Harry Osborn. The whole entire that evil laugh, when he was in the dining room and he's eating the pie, he's like, "Oh, that's good pie." After manipulating Peter Parker and MJ to break up and whatnot, that is evil Harry Osborn. That's Green Goblin Harry Osborn. That's the Harry Osborn that I read back in the 90s when I first started reading Spider-Man. Because when I first started reading Spider-Man, Norman was dead. Harry Osborn was Green Goblin. So to me, that was excellent. That was a good callback to what I fell in love with back in the 90s. In Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's just two, the relationship between Peter Parker and Gwen are excellent. Mostly because Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone were actually dating at the time. So that had a lot to do with their on-screen chemistry, but they had excellent on-screen chemistry. They were very cute together. And I mentioned this earlier, the death of Gwen Stacy. I was impressed they actually pulled the trigger on. They actually killed Gwen Stacy in this movie. It wasn't the exact same scene, but I don't need scene for scene. I don't need the exact same stories as long as you get the heart of the characters. But speaking of the heart of the characters, Harry Osborn, Green Goblin, and Amazing Spider-Man 2 was terrible. Green Goblin is supposed to be Spider-Man's most important villains, and he was thrown in the last 5 minutes of the movie.
Cop out.
It was just such a disservice to the character. And then Rhino. They showed him at the beginning of the movie as an only human, and then they showed him at the end of the movie in the Rhino suit, and that's it.
It did feel like they set up for a third,
but
they never got.
No.
Just because of how bad 2 was, and because of how badly it performed, they finally caved and agreed with Marvel to reboot into the Holland universe. They
finally admitted, okay, maybe we don't know what we're doing. Maybe we shouldn't have cast Paul Giamatti as the Rhino. Don't get me wrong. I like Paul Giamatti quite a bit. I'm a big fan of him. The Rhino, he is not. So those are the movies. TV shows. If you guys have watched past episodes, you know what TV show I'm going to recommend. But I'm going to recommend it again. Spectacular Spider-Man. It is the best Spider-Man storytelling outside of the comics that I've ever seen. That's including Far From Home. That's including, No Insult to Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse is an excellent movie. But Spectacular Spider-Man just nails it on all cylinders. It's excellent. the story with Venom, the story with Harry and Norman Osborn, Gwen Stacy, Mary Jane. It's only 2 seasons long, and they do so much right.
It's the one. I think it's the right one. It's the one where they like, jump in with like the main caricature of Spider-Man.
No, that was Ultimate Spider-Man.
Okay. I have seen Spectacular and Ultimate. I'm just always confused which one's which.
Spectacular Spider-Man is the one that with the more Nickelodeon-looking animation. Peter Parker, every time you see him, he always has a tag on sticking out of his shirt, that's very Peter Parker. I don't have any way to show, but and then I watched Ultimate Spider-Man, and I enjoyed Ultimate Spider-Man for what it was, but it's nowhere near as good as Spectacular Spider-Man. There was also the early 2000s Spider-Man. I think it was Unlimited Spider-Man, Spider-Man Unlimited, or something like that.
Is that the one where it's set where he's actually in college?
I think
I remember that one.
He was voiced by Neil Patrick Harris. That one was all right. I wasn't a huge fan of that. Much like how I wasn't a huge fan of the Batman. Like, I love the Batman animated series, but the cartoon that was called The Batman, where you have Joker doing monkey kung fu, and not a fan of that. So this one here, not that silly. It was actually pretty good. The animation was good. You use a lot of computer effects in combination with the hand-drawn effects, much like the 90s cartoon. The 90s cartoon Spider-Man used a lot of computer effects with the hand-drawn effects. More on the hand-drawn, less on the computer. This one was more computer, less hand-drawn.
The 2000 Spider-Man and was like the one that I moved on to after watching the 60s reruns and like seeing enough of those. Then I moved on to that one, and it, along with an Iron Man show that I can never remember.
Justin will.
The name of it. No, he doesn't even know.
Oh, really?
It's like I've mentioned it to him before, and he's like, I've never heard of that one. It's an Iron Man show where it's set where he's in high school.
Really?
Yeah.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's set where he's in high school. And, like, he's a teenager, and I just remember, and, like, it was him, like, he had made the Iron Man tech initially, and he was going to show it to his dad, but someone, I think, someone sent a missile after the plane, and Tony survived because of the tech, but his dad died.
Okay.
So, I always remember it, but no one ever seems to remember it.
No. I will have to check that out, though.
Yeah, and it is a more computer-generated animation style, too.
Cool. That vaguely sounds familiar. I watch a lot of watchcartoons.net. That's where I stream all my cartoons and animated movies and anime and all that. So I might have seen that on there and checked it out, maybe, possibly. But I'll definitely check that out.
Well, by the time we get to Iron Man, we'll have looked into it more.
Yes. But yeah, then you have the 90s cartoon, the Spider-Man, the animated series. That was a widely popular one, and a lot of people prefer that one. A lot of people say that that's the best Spider-Man cartoon. I challenge you to rewatch. Actually, I was rewatching some older episodes of that animated series today. Actually, I was watching the 3-part symbiote episode. It is actually still pretty good. It was very accurate to the comics sometimes. They pulled a lot of stories from the comics, but they altered it quite a bit. And also, it was they neutered it. They neutered the violence. There was no punching, no kicking. Spider-Man would just use his webbing or body check. A lot of body checks. Everybody's body checking in that. Rhino, body checking. Tombstone, body checking. Scorpion, body checking. Everybody's body checking everybody. They're all hockey players. So that was the complaint I had about the 90s animated series. But good stories. Good stories, good voice actors, just the action was terrible. And that was going on at the same time as the X-Men animated series. And the X-Men animated series was pulling stories directly out of the comics. was very accurate to their comics, and they didn't pull any punches on the action. The action was fantastic.
It was probably aiming different audiences.
Yes. I forgot who was in different networks too. I'm pretty sure. Although they did do a crossover with
Fox
Spider-Man.
was probably the X-Men.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure Fox was also doing Spider-Man though. Not too sure. Yeah. But anyways, and then you have the 60s Spider-Man, which...
the classic...
Yes. Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. That, the classic theme song, that was covered by the Ramones. Awesome cover, by the way. And then the cheesy animation. But it was good because those were very accurate to the 1960s Amazing Spider-Man run as well. A lot of stories were pulled from the 1960s Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man. Let's also not forget there was also a couple of live action shows that just failed and were terrible. And then there's the Japanese Spider-Man that is... Okay. Get this. All right, so I don't know if you ever heard of this.
I have looked into him.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
With the big mech and the Power Ranger abilities and whatnot. So to the audience, Japan had a Spider-Man series, one that you can tell the Power Rangers got their idea from this Spider-Man show. He's just a dude who knows martial arts, who fights giant monsters and summons a giant robot to fight other monsters that inside this robot. It has nothing to do with the American Spider-Man at all. I don't know why he's called Spider-Man. Maybe he sticks to walls. I doubt it. I'm pretty sure all the action is inside the robot. So, yeah.
It's certainly a different take on Spider-Man.
Yes. Which I always wondered if... what was her name from the Spider-Verse movie? Penny. Yeah, I know she's got her own series as well in the actual comics, but it makes me wonder if Penny was an idea inspired by this old Japanese Spider-Man cartoon.
It would make sense, show. Especially since she's done in anime style.
Yeah, exactly. Done in anime style, fights inside of a robot. Yeah. Yeah. And into Spider-Verse as well. We both highly recommend watching it. It's a good introduction to many characters and different ideas. It's an introduction to the Ultimate Spider-Man universe, which was created by Michael Bendis. That's a name that I'm going to put out there. You'll notice his name in a lot of movies and shows and whatnot. Brian Michael Bendis is his name. He's the creator of like the Ultimate Spider-Man. He's the one responsible for Civil War. He's the one responsible for a lot of big things that happened in the 2000s, Marvel. And he's actually been a part of a lot of movies as well. If you'll notice, if you look at the producers in most Marvel movies, you'll see Brian Michael Bendis in the producer names. Yeah. What are we doing for time?
We've gone an hour 12.
All right. So we figured we're going to do Spider-Man in a two-part because there's just so much to talk about and there's so much that we know about him. As you can see, I've got a treasure trove. This is a fraction of my collection back home. These are just my most important ones. And we haven't talked about Civil War. We haven't talked about House of M. We haven't talked about the various iterations of Spider-Man. We're going to do an episode on Miles Morales. Yeah. We're going to do an episode on Spider-Man 2099. We're also going to do an episode on the Superior Spider-Man. And that one is twisted. I'm not going to give anything away, but we will do an episode on Superior Spider-Man. Wait for that. You guys are in for a treat if you don't know what Superior Spider-Man is. Anything you have to add?
If you have any questions or things that you want us to talk about further about Spider-Man in another episode, be sure to hit us up on Twitter or Instagram at NerdForge. Also, just hit us up in the chat. We'll read that. And like we said, Miles Morales and them get their own episodes. This is more about Peter Parker. But if you have any comments about those, feel free to hit us up, and we'll include them later.
Next week we might also talk about the ultimate Peter Parker, the ultimate Spider-Man, because Miles Morales is the Spider-Man there, but before Miles Morales, it was Peter Parker. So we might also talk about that as well. Kind of like a lead into Miles Morales. All right, everybody. So that's going to be it for tonight. I didn't want to go too long on this because I could go on for hours about Spider-Man. But yeah, tune in next week where we're going to do part 2 of Spider-Man.
See you guys. Bye.